Welcome. We're thrilled you're here with us. We hope that you are getting as much out of this as we are. We wish you were in the same room with us so that we could engage with you personally, but you are taking part right now in the Summit Breakout Session 4, Part 2. And this is Do You See What I See, Part 2 with Angela Weekley. I hope that you've already gotten this down, but I'm going to repeat that we do have a forum for you to have some questions and answers with some back and forth with the presenters. You can do that by using the question box on the streaming platform to upload your questions. I have a question and answer technician who will be monitoring those questions. All of them will be answered, and some of them will be answered during this session. So we'll be watching that closely, and we'll look for ways to engage Angela. Now, it seems as though if this is part 2 that you have already met Angela, but I'm still going to repeat her background because we're thrilled to have her as part of this summit. Angela is a champion of diversity, equality, and inclusion. She delivers her passion for serving others in her position as the manager of community inclusion at Veridian Credit Union, where Angela has worked for 9 years. Her service to others continues during Angela's free time as she helps the Salvation Army, Waterloo Community Development, Greater Des Moines Partnership, Greater Cedar Valley Alliance and Chamber, United Way of East Central Iowa, and Inclusive ICR. Many organizations get the opportunity to experience Angela's willingness to be a helping hand, and her partnerships will continue to grow over time. As a proud Waterloo native, it's no surprise that Angela chose to attend colleges nearby. Wartburg College, where she earned her bachelor's degree in education, and the University of Northern Iowa, where she earned her master's degree in post-secondary education. Well, there's no group here that can give you an applause, Angela, but we will say from the deepest part of our hearts that we're thankful you're a part of this summit, and we're looking forward to hearing from you just now. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. I just like to add to the bio, Angela is my formal name, and I think of all of you as my family, my brothers and sisters in Christ, my fellow Salvationists, and so when you refer to me, or if you sent me questions or any of that, please refer to me as Angie. I just turned my microphone down, so I hope you could still hear me. Please refer to me as Angie. I also want to say, man, today has been so much information, very, very heavy. So just wanted to lighten everything up just a teeny tiny bit before I dive into the heaviness of what I also have to share, and tell you a couple things. One, my dog's name is Emmanuel. You may or may not get to see him today in the second part of this session. His name is Emmanuel on purpose because we often need to be reminded that God is with us, and so that's how he got his name. At the end of my master's program, I was reading a book called The Secret Things of God. And if you want it to be close to God, you just needed to remember that he is always with us, right? And so that's how he got his name. With that said, the reason why you might get to see him is my granddaughter comes here after school. I know I don't look old enough to have a granddaughter unless you can see the gray. But she gets out of school at 2:43, so she might be jumping in right at the end, which will make him go into a frenzy of barking. So I apologize for that ahead of time. One other thing is, if you are on the Facebook page, the Salvation Army Racial Justice Summit page on Facebook, yesterday I referenced the Harvard implicit bias test, and Jennifer Schmidt, it's called Project Implicit, has put a link to that on that page. So if you want to look for Jennifer Schmidt's comments, she did put a link to it on there for you to be able to go and do some of those tests, just to kind of see where you are around your implicit bias, meaning your unconscious bias is another word for that. Implicit is the education-y term, for lack of a better term. So with that said, we'll dive on in, and we are going to just start off by saying, yesterday I talked a lot about I talked about the difference between implicit and explicit bias. And I told you some of the biases that I have and some experiences that have shaped those biases. And then we end it talking about how do I, as an individual, how can I be more aware of what those biases are? So we're going to start there again and go over those circles, okay? So the first thing that we need to do, just as a reminder, is that we need to recognize that every single last one of us have bias. Um, the way that our brains are developed, the way that we are wired is to categorize things quickly so we can move quickly throughout our days. And so bias plays in because of how our brains are made. So just want to remember that. As a result, I think it's really important for us to develop the opportunity to shine that flashlight on ourselves, to find ways to recognize when that is coming about, to find different ways of recognizing that and understanding what that is, whether that is the project implicit test that you can take, or coming to summits or conferences and making yourself more educated about different topics. Those are different ways that you can shine the flashlight on yourself. Again, the work of becoming an anti-racist starts with the self. And so one of the things that you can do, again, is start with yourself before you, as someone so eloquently put it, George Mason talked about the log in the eye. Before you start pointing somebody else's log in the eye, you must take out your own. So take the time to really reflect on yourself. Also, be mindful that you don't know everything. Practice constructive uncertainty. I don't know everything about anything. And the things I do know, I don't know everything about them. And so there's always room and opportunity for me to grow and learn. And that'll help you overcome biases. Explore awkwardness and discomfort. There's been many times during this summit that I bet you've gotten an opportunity to do that. And the more times that you can do that, the more that you can embrace change, and that you can make this the Salvation Army that we love for all people to love. Engage yourself with people that you consider others. I think that is also really important. Someone asked yesterday during the session, like, how do I do that? It has to be authentic, right? So you don't want to go in thinking you have something I need and I'm going to get it from you. But how can it be mutually beneficial? How can you feel like a human and not just someone who is throwing knowledge at other people? And then, as always, find somebody that will give you feedback. That's someone who's always honest with you. That's not your yes man, but you're a person that will always be like, hey, this is something you might want to take a look at. When I saw you do this, this is a way that you can change. Make sure that you're getting feedback often. I can tell you at the end of the day yesterday, I debriefed a little bit with Lieutenant Natalie from the training college, one of my very best friends, and one of the people that always keeps it real with me and is always able to give me really good feedback. So those are some of the things that you can just start with, right? So when we start there, the next thing that we're going to do is, when we do finally realize and pay attention to some of the biases that we might have, and we become more aware of them, what do we do then? So if you want to go to the next slide, I like to use this pause model. Now, this pause model is not something that is usually used in implicit bias. It's conflict resolution. When you're about to have conflict, how do you slow down? Now, conflict can be good and conflict can be bad. It just means that it exists, right? So when you have conflict, it's important to pause. And so when you are addressing a bias that you know that you have, or you become more aware of something that you've done unconsciously, how do you pause in those conversations? So the P stands for stop and pay attention to what is actually beneath the judgment and assessment. Where does that come from? So if we go back to a story that I shared yesterday, I shared my fear of small towns because my mom has given me these stories that she has shared with me about small towns. If I dive deeper, I think about my grandma was from small town Iowa. She's from Tripola, Iowa, which if you're not from here, you think it says Tripoli, but she's from Tripola, Iowa. And we would often, in a small farm, all German, all Lutheran town. They came here during World War II. To escape Germany, right? A lot of people came to the United States to escape Germany during that Second World War. And she was her family was one of them, and they moved to an all German, all Lutheran town. So as a little girl, one of the things that I also remember is my great-grandparents would take us to town, and when we would go to town, we had to play the get down game. I did not realize when I paused that my fear for small towns also comes from playing the get down game, where I wasn't able to go inside any places. I had to stay in the car, and my white cousins also would have to play the get down game, where we would get down in the back seat until the adults came back to the car. They did that out of my safety, but I then started to internalize that means that small town is not safe for me unless I'm on the farm. And so pay attention to where that does come from. Acknowledge my reactions. So then the A stands for acknowledge your own reactions and interpretations and judgments. So acknowledge the fact that, man, these are my experiences that might not necessarily be true. Where does that come from? Why am I feeling that way? And how do I get over that judgment? Understand that could be not a possible reaction. That could not be true. That a small town, yesterday I talked about how my granddaughter turned 9, and on the way back, my GPS took me a way I didn't want to go, and I went through small. Thank you. I'm sorry. I keep pushing the little button here. I'm going to move it out of my way because I talk with my hands. Keeping that out of the way. So what I was saying is I was sharing with you yesterday, those of you who attended, that my GPS took me a different way on the way back from Minneapolis to Iowa. It took me a different way than I wanted to go, and I went through small town. And my granddaughter was like, oh man, I have to go to the bathroom right now. First of all, when you go through small towns, there's not usually a lot of bathrooms to stop at because there's no rest areas or anything like that. Second of all, I was fearful. Like, what if she doesn't get the treatment that she's used to? How do I guard her? How do I protect her? And then in that moment, had to be like, how do I not project my fear from small town onto her? Because that might not necessarily be the situation, right? So how do I understand the possible that the other reactions or the other interpretations and the other ways that small towns can be seen? She went to the bathroom. She made best friends with the attendant. They told us about, man, it's a good thing you stopped here because there's not another bathroom for a long period of time. It was actually a very pleasant experience. And it may not have been. I could have caused anxiety from my granddaughter by passing on this information if I hadn't taken the time to kind of pause. So search for empowering ways to deal productively with the situation. So one of the things that I have learned to do, any of you that know me know that I have not met a stranger. And those of you who have not gotten a chance to meet me one-on-one, first time you see me, you can hug me after the coronavirus is gone. I'm a very open person. I haven't met a stranger. And so one of the ways I've done is I like to just engage people in conversation. Try to find some commonality in the conversations when I am in small towns to engage people in those conversations. That has been one of the ways that I deal with the situation and to calm my fear. I also sometimes will quote scripture as I'm going into something where I'm having this fear that is not necessarily founded. So I might pull out a 2 Timothy 1:7 and be reminded that the God has not given me but a spirit of fear, but of a sound mind. right? And this is not a sound mind to go in fearing something that I don't even know based on a past experience or not even my own experience. And then I execute that plan. So then you go in and you have those conversations. Just to give another example of that, yesterday I talked about another bias that I have that is for something. I have a bias for Wartburg College, which is a really good bias because Wartburg College is the best college ever. You guys can look it up if you want to, or you could just trust me. And that is meant to be my attempt at a joke, so hopefully you guys are laughing. Excuse me. But one of the things that I told you is that when I get a resume, when I'm in a hiring situation, when I get a resume and I see Wartburg College on there, I need to pause and be like, okay, just because my experience was a particular way at Wartburg College doesn't mean that that's everyone's experience or that they attended that college for that same reason. Perfect example of that is I'm very outgoing. My little brother, Anthony, who I talked about yesterday, my youngest brother, he also went to Wartburg College, very introverted, doesn't speak. Matter of fact, he hated his experience there because most of the people there were very outgoing and like me, and he didn't like it. So he's not necessarily fit my mold of what Wartburg College would look like. So I need to pay attention to where did that come from? Is that my own personal thing? How can I stop that? What are my and I need to then acknowledge my reactions, interpretations, and judgments that I'm making. I am assuming that everybody from Wartburg is great. Not necessarily. That's not necessarily true. And it could be true for this person and it could not be. So don't give them benefits that they did not deserve or they did not earn. I need to actually really see and hear what is in their resume. Understanding that their thoughts or their thoughts about going to Wartburg College may not have been from, I'm going to this liberal evangelistic college where I'm going to be able to learn how to teach students from a Christian-based standpoint. There were people who went to Wartburg College who weren't even Christian, even though that's the reason why I attended there. So, of course, then their judgments and their things are not even the same. Search for a most empowering, productive way to deal with the situation. So, like I said, often because of that, and I need the ability to have some feedback, shine the flashlight on myself, then get some feedback. So I often bring in someone else in the interview process, someone else to look at the resume, someone else to help me also see and confirm what I see and what I do not see. And then that is usually the plan. I then have them interview with me, look at the resume, and things like that with me. I think this will be a time where I can take just a little bit of a pause and see if there are any questions that people might have.
So Angela, the most frequent feedback that we're getting is that there was a break a bit in the video, but we've gotten that squared away now.
Okay. So no questions? Okay, well then
So
I will. Yeah. I will keep on. So my intention for sharing information about understanding that we all have bias, my intention for showing that is my purpose is wanting to be able to share with all of us ways that we can engage people and ways that we could unconsciously make people not want to attend the Salvation Army or leave the Salvation Army or speak poorly of us in the world. As long as we are not being aware of some of the things that we can do to hurt other people, and we're not trying to fix those things, there will be these groups of people who say the Salvation Army is not designed for me. And so my purpose in sharing that is that I know that is not the Salvation Army that we want to be. We want to be the Salvation Army that is welcoming to all. We want to make sure that we are able to meet people where they are at. And by showing them the love of Christ and not by showing them the biases that we have. So how do we show people the love of Christ? Is by making sure that we try really, really hard to understand some of the experiences or media presentations or whatever it might be that we actually have, so that we can overcome them and be able to interact with all people. So I'm going to show you just a little bit of a video that really helps me, that really puts in perspective that purpose of why it is so important for us to be able to engage with other people. Before the video is played, I just want you to know that it could seem like it's not very connected, because he's just talking about his purpose as a comedian. It's Micheal Jr., the comedian, right? He's talking about his purpose for doing comedy. And my purpose for wanting to further the kingdom of God is so important as to why we do it. So I can just give you this information without exposing some of my personal bias, but then it's not as real. So I'm going to show this video, because in the next portion, we're going to be working together. And I want you to understand that the purpose and why it is so important for you to be real, as opposed to just having on, again, that mask that we talked about yesterday. So I have just recently stopped being able to cry when I see that video, because the difference between the what and the why is so important. So when you say, how do I engage people of others? If you know why you want to do that, it will look a lot different, and it'll be more authentic than if you're just I want to get this information from them. I'm engaging them from a standpoint of why, of wanting to understand, of wanting to grow together, of wanting to learn together. So we're going to go into the next phase of the session, where we're going to talk. Not quite. I think it's a slide before then. The slide before the video. I'm sorry, I took them out of order. We're going to go into a session where I'm going to give you some time to kind of work in small groups if you're with a group of people. I'm going to have you work individually if you are by yourself. But I'm going to set it up for you so you have some understanding. And it's going to be kind of awkward in this particular setting, because I'm going to have you really take the 15 minutes. I'm going to give you 15 minutes to really engage in what this would look like for you personally. But I'm going to set it up for you. So Dr. Steve Robbins does, he's out of Michigan. I believe he used to work at the University of Michigan. He has done a lot of research around implicit bias from a brain's aspect. He has since written several books, and one of them in particular is called What If? And the What If book, he has different activities that you can do to engage in understanding your implicit bias. And so one of the activities he has is called Inaccurate Maps. Now, I don't know about you guys. I travel a lot for my job here at Veridian. For my job at Veridian Credit Union, I travel around the state, and then we are also into Nebraska. And so I have to travel there often. I'm a department of just 4 people. So that means we have to spread ourselves throughout the entire state of Iowa and into the 6 counties into Nebraska. So that requires me to travel quite a bit. With that said, I often have to use either iPhone Maps or Google Maps or some type of map to get me to where it is that I'm going. Now, if you envision that, think about, I even just said on my way back from Minnesota, I'm relying on Siri to get me back to 35, and she takes me to 52, which will get me home, but it's not the way that I want it to go. It's not the way that I had envisioned the map taking me. So I'm going to tell you a story about a map that I had made up that was not accurate. So as a young girl, I often wanted to please God in a way and devote my entire life to God in a way that would be pleasing to Him. From as early as 8 years old, that's what I could always remember. I wanted to devote my entire self, my entire being to Him. Now, I grew up in the South. I actually wanted to be a nun, but it's kind of hard when you're not Catholic because I wanted to still teach. And I wanted to completely devote myself to God. And so one of the things that I determined was, okay, I probably can't be a nun. But I also, growing up in the Salvation Army in Iowa, in the Central Territory, there weren't a lot of officers that looked like me. So I also thought that that was not for me. I could not become an officer, so how was I going to be able to devote my entire self to God? I wanted to give away all my possessions. I wanted to just fully dive in, and I didn't think officership was for me because nobody looked like me that I ever saw. Nobody at youth councils, nobody that was assigned to my corps, nobody that I saw at camp, not even any of the camp counselors. Nothing said that officership would be for me. And then as I got to high school, I learned that not only was officership not for me because of what I looked like, but that I had to marry an officer. And when you have to marry an officer and there's nobody that looks like you, so if I become an officer, I'll never get to get married because there are no Black men that are officers as well. So, long story long, I didn't become an officer. And so much for thinking I wouldn't get to get married. I still didn't get to get married, but that's neither here nor there. I didn't become an officer because the map that I had made about what an officer looks like was tainted from just my experience. I didn't practice that constructive uncertainty to dive in and ask questions. I didn't take that pause model and say, hey, is this an accurate map of what officers look like? As you saw over the course of 2 days, there's officers in every nationality, every ethnicity, every race. But my experience growing up in Iowa at 18 said that that was not necessarily the case. So that's why I went to college. So that's one way that you can take a map and how maps can change and can get you get you in the right direction, but also could be misleading if you don't explore other opportunities, right? So I didn't become an officer because I had an inaccurate map of what officers looked like. We can take that another step further. I don't know about you, but growing up as a Salvationist, my friends would often tease me because they would be like, the Salvation Army is not a church. It's a social service organization. It's not a church. So like, what denomination are you? And I'd be like, well, I'm a Salvationist. That's my denomination. And they'll be like, yeah, no, it's not. So I would resort to even opening up the phone book and be like, here under, for those of you who are younger, the phone book is where we used to have to go to find people to call them. We didn't have Google. We didn't have Sir Google or Siri to help us with that. We actually had to pull out a book. So my attempt at a joke, Cadet Sean, if you're listening, hopefully you're laughing at least and can hear my snort. There is, and I would show them, like under here, you see that we are separated. We're our own denomination. And I didn't have enough information to really help them with that map of what the Salvation Army looked like. I don't remember, Wednesday nights were church nights for everybody else, except for those of us who were in the Salvation Army, because we had character building or Sunbeams Girl Guards on Tuesday nights. So Tuesday nights was often like a very hard night because that was when they would load you with homework because Wednesday night was church night, so they couldn't give you homework on Wednesday night. So there was often quizzes on Wednesdays. There were tests on Wednesdays. And so Tuesdays you would go to church, and then you'd have to go home and stay up late and do all of your homework. So a lot of people have very inaccurate maps for what the Salvation Army is. It's a social service organization. It's an organization who is not open to, it's a very conservative organization. It's a very non-LGBTQ friendly organization. It's all of these different things that they have formulated without having enough information about what a salvationist is, or what a salvationist looks like, or knowing one. So they're doing it based off of social media posts that are inaccurate, or just a myriad of things to come up with. I had a friend, so I started an Embrace group, and we used it as a community outreach. So I started an Embrace group with predominantly African American women in the area who were leaders in their respective denominations. So one of them was Baptist, one was Pentecostal, one was non-denominational, but all of them went to churches that were attended by predominantly Black parishioners. And when we got together, they were like, so you go to the Salvation Army, and this is embraces a thing from the Salvation Army, but the Salvation Army is a cult, so how can we attend? And I was like, wow, I've never heard the Salvation Army called a cult. And my friend who was Baptist was like, well, here's the information that I have about why the Salvation Army is a cult. You wear a uniform, you have different doctrine, all these very inaccurate things about what a salvationist looks like. And so during our Embrace time, we were able to kind of commune with one another and learn about each other's beliefs and their doctrinations, and find out that, as Dr. Major Platt has said, that we are followers first of Jesus of Nazareth, that I am a Jesus freak just like that they are. And so then we were able to really have lots of meaningful conversations around tons of different topics around this Embrace group. So those are some examples of inaccurate maps and how people look at them. What I want each of you to do, either in a small group if you have the ability to do so, or just by yourself, I want you to reflect on a time where you had made up something about a group of people, whether that group of people is by race, or whether that group of people or people that come to your core that might be from a certain socioeconomic status, whether that be a socioeconomic status that is middle class, or that is maybe a lower class, or I like how Dr. Ra was talking about the welfare queen, because I think that's what people thought of my mom, and as to why she no longer goes to the Army is because they thought of her as a welfare queen. So I want you to just take some time to think about what are those groups where you had misconceptions and then the map was completely flipped. Because the more time that you can spend thinking about those different instances, that really helps you play into what biases you have. So what biases you might have that you don't know that you have, but you're making judgment, or you're making policy, or you're making decisions around those particular things. What judgments that you have around, it's about to be Christmas time. So maybe you want to talk about people that come and get assistance year after year for Christmas donations for their children. What assumptions might you make about them, and when has that been inaccurate? So we're going to take about 15 minutes, and I really want you to just think of just one instance and then go back to thinking about why. Why do you have that? Why do you have that inaccurate map of that particular group, or why did you? So I'm going to set a timer for 15 minutes. I'm sure David will as well. But I'm going to give you 15 minutes, and I just want you to dive in and really take some time to reflect, because I don't want us to walk away and not have reflected on it, or say do this later, because what if time gets away and you don't get to really think about it later? I want you to spend the time in it right now. So put 15 minutes starting now. Hey, I just want you guys all to know that you have about 10 minutes left. I really want you to just think about these situations, really dive in and explore how you are feeling and about these bias, about these inaccurate maps. Really take the time to dig in and take the time to really do this activity. You got about 10 more minutes, and then we will be back. I'd love to hear some of your reflections. Also, if you have questions, you can put them in. I might take some questions right after we come back on in about 10 minutes. Welcome back. I hope you found that to be a good use of your time. And for those of you who are able to do small groups for you to kind of really engage in some conversation, for those of you who are working independently, I hope that you reach out to someone to kind of share some of those experiences and kind of debrief, because I think that is one of the ways to shine the flashlight on yourself, is to take a look at those maps that we have made up or that we have found to be inaccurate, and then really dive in to understand why. Um, so before we move on to the next portion, I just wanted to do one more that I thought might be somewhat controversial, and for us to explore what that might look like. So we've had some conversation around Black Lives Matters. Black Lives Matters as a statement, and it'd be necessary, and then also Black Lives Moves as a movement. And they have a full position, and one of the things that they have that is a position is to defund the police. I'm not going to get political. You can relax. It's going to be okay. Just follow along with me. So defund the police. What does that really mean? Does that mean that we don't want police? Does that mean that the movement thinks we should get rid of all of our police? Or what does that mean? So I'm going to just take you. We were doing corporate prayer at my core, and my understanding of defund the police, I will tell you in just a moment here, but my understanding of it is different than most of the people in my core. And so the people in my core, we're praying. We were doing corporate prayer, and one of the people in the core was praying about how it is necessary for us to have the police, and please don't defund the police and things of that nature. And during prayer, I felt convicted, and I wanted to correct her right away and make it different. And what I had to do was then take that pause model, because I don't know why she's making that statement or why she feels that way. And I need to really think about, why am I reacting? Why is my reaction one of like, I need to fix this? Why is it that? Right? So I need to take a time to pause and think about that, and then really like map out what does that really mean. So for me, the reason why I react differently is because unlike some of the conversation, my core is still in the city, and it's right in the heart of where we have our homeless population, right where we have the largest population of low to moderate income people. And I bought a house on purpose in the area that is in somewhat walking distance, not really walking distance, but kind of walking distance to the core. I bought my house here on purpose because I wanted to live among the people that I used to be, and the people that I want to help in understanding understanding them. And so I live in that area. Now, as a result, I actually see the police in my neighborhood 4 to 5 times a day. Now, when I ask my coworkers who don't live in this area how often they see the police, and they're like, we never see the police. We never see the police, and if we do see the police, then we know that there's something wrong in our neighborhood. Where for me, when I see the police, it's just natural. It's just normal, because I live in an area that is highly policed. So what defund the police means to me is like, is that police interaction in my neighborhood really necessary, or should it really look like some of the other places? So defund the police means like, should we reevaluate what policing looks like in our communities? Does policing need to happen in our school? That's what defund the police means to me, and my understanding of it. Her understanding of it, the person, so we were able to have a conversation. And so I didn't just stay on that 6 on defund the police. I said, help me understand a little bit more. Help me understand a little bit more about why she came up to me afterwards. I don't know if she saw my face or whatever. She came up to me afterwards and said, hey, explain this to me. How do you feel this way? And I was like, tell me a little bit more about why you feel that way. And she was like, well, I think the police are necessary. And what we found is that we both think the police are necessary. We both think that the police, so there was an inaccurate map of what it was that I thought she meant. There was an inaccurate map of what she thought I meant. And from our perspectives, we were both right, but we were also both wrong. And when we were able to have a conversation, we were able to kind of meet in the middle to understand each other. Not necessarily to necessarily agree with each other or disagree with each other, but actually just have the chance to take the opportunity to hear each other and hear each other, and also then to get an understanding of where the other one and why the other one has the stance that they do. I think the more times that we can take into consideration and relax and pause ourselves in our Facebook statuses. Why does someone else's Facebook status make you react in a certain way? Why do you feel the need to comment on their Facebook status? Is that the proper format to be able to learn about each other's perspectives? So if we talk about social media in general, I say Facebook because I know I'm older and Facebook is what I use. I know that people that are a little bit younger than me aren't quite using that format. But at the same time, that same interaction can happen where there is definite opportunities for there to be miscommunication. And then that keeps us very divided. It further perpetuates the biases that we have explicitly and implicitly. So one of the greatest barriers to breaking down implicit bias is to have that conversation, to take the time to have the conversations, that are important. So, and to make sure that we become the Salvation Army that is diverse, that is inclusive, and that is anti-racist. If you want to put up the next slide, in Hebrews 6 and 10, Hebrews 6 and 10 says, God is not unjust so as to overlook your work and the love that you have shown for his name. I think that is important, again, that we have conversations. So if we shut down, how can people see Jesus through us? How can people see God through us if we're combative? If we open up and have language, we don't necessarily have to agree, but people can feel that God is coming through us as well. It's super important that we take the time to understand, again, what is the purpose of this conversation? What is the purpose of my stance on any particular topic, whether it's political or from a social justice standpoint? What is the purpose in that? And knowing that God is not an unjust God, that he has given us the ability to reason and to be able to communicate with each other. I think that this is an important time for us to take a look at our position statement as salvationists around racism. So if you want to go to the next slide. On the next slide, you will see that I have put kind of the position statement that we as salvationists, when you say I want to be a salvationist, this is a position, one of the positions that you adopt as well. So the statement says that you will take personal action against racism as an example of how Jesus takes stance, and that you will view every person in the image of God. I always tell my sunbeams and my children's church, I always tell them, like, man, yes, we all look very different. My granddaughter will tell you that if we all look the same, it would be a very boring place. If we all thought the same, it would be very boring, right? We are all many parts of one body. And there's no one part that's more important than the other. All the parts need to interact together. And I think that statement and taking the opportunity to make sure that we live by that statement allows people to see an example of how Jesus may have lived his life here. The second one says, the second bullet says, to influence the attitudes of others by rejecting racial statements, slurs, and jokes. You could be like, oh, that means we need to be politically correct. That means we need to take the time to try to me, it doesn't mean necessarily being politically correct, although I'm not against that. I think that it is important that we take the time to make sure that we're not having fun at the expense of somebody else. And when we take the time and we're laughing at statements, or we're also making statements, or we're saying these slurs, or allowing someone else around us, we're not being advocates for for the parts of the body that might look a little differently than us. And I think it's important to make them feel welcome to have an inclusive Salvation Army, that we are advocates and we stand up and say, like, I don't have to be Native American to say, if you're saying that someone is an Indian giver, I don't have to be Native American to be offended by that, and to take a stance and say, hey, that probably is not a statement that we want to make, and take the opportunity to maybe give somebody the history of what that word means, or where that statement came from. You don't have to do that, but that's just what I have chosen to do, because that's it's my plan and how I've executed it. So it is my S, like set the plan for me, is to understand where some of those statements come from. And once people understand them, then they don't necessarily use that language. The other one is to raise our families in the appearance of to appreciate the diversity in cultures and ethnicity. We'll raise our families in that way. So we invite the questions. We invite the questions of our children, of our children's church, of our Sunbeams, of our Girl Guards, of our Rangers. We invite those questions about race. We let them ask those questions, and then we are prepared to give them some of the answers, or providing a space for them to feel comfortable saying those things. We teach our children about different cultures, about history. We allow our children to play with people, or just have good play with toys that are from different cultures, whether that is a bolero or it is a doll that is a doll of a color different than the skin tone they have, whether it is a book that says, I am enough, and the little girl on the front of the book is a black girl. But even though the little girl on the front of the book is a black girl, I am enough is important for all girls. And it doesn't have to be that normalization of it being a white girl for us to know that it's for all girls. This book is not just for black girls, it's for all girls. Those are some of the ways that we help our families appreciate and understand, both our families within our cores and our families within our homes. We encourage each other to join with others in combining efforts about justice for victims of racism. So maybe I don't understand what Black Lives Matters means. Maybe I don't understand what's happening at the border with women being having their female parts taken out, and no longer being able to to bring about life. Maybe I don't understand that. And so what I need to do is practice that constructive uncertainty. And I need to learn so that I can stand beside my Latinx sisters when they are outraged about children being in cages. I can stand beside, I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm getting emotional. It's been a very emotional 2 days. I apologize. Well, I can stand beside my Black and brothers and sisters when they see someone get shot in the back. When they see someone get shot in the back on social media and they cry, even though they don't know that person, because you don't have to know that person to know that could be your brother, that could be your son. I can feel that could be my son, even though I don't have brown skin, because we are all many parts of one body. So I can stand beside them and try to understand a little bit more about what the world looks like and what the world is around them. And I can take my bias and understand it better so that I can better interact with people that are different than me. So I want us to just pause and breathe. I'm going to invite you to ask questions. Invite you to ask questions now, so I'm opening it up to you. Do you have any questions that I might be able to answer for you?
We do have a couple of questions that I think are interwoven, actually. One came from an officer and another doesn't declare whether they're an officer or not, but it's mainly what is the next step to identify implicit bias and how these biases become explicit? And then secondly, what is the next step in confronting these biases as they impact the church community or the organization as a whole? So one of these questions came from an African American officer who is experiencing other officers in her division not making her feel like she belongs in the division. That absolutely really hurts me to know that that's happening. But how would you help her to broach that topic with those people that don't have open boundaries?
I think that's a super important question. One, because this is officers of color. This is not the first time that I've heard that I don't feel welcome or I don't feel a part of that other officers are treating me in a certain way. And I think one of the things that we have, I'm making a lot of assumptions here, and I apologize ahead of time, but this is just from my experience of having conversations with officers, both recently and in the past, about how we show up and how we can or cannot have conversations around. I completely apologize. I may have accidentally locked the door and my granddaughter can't get in. So I need to let her in or she's going to be stuck outside in the cold. So I'm going to pause for just a second and I'll come back to that question. Okay, I'm back. I apologize. So this is this new norm of the life of the coronavirus, and anyway. So I think one of the things is that, and as people of color in general, we often have to be the people who are in teach mode and using things as teachable moments and pointing it out. I think that the officers that I have experienced have just kind of taken it on themselves and only talk to other officers who look like them. But I think it's time for us as people of color to not sit back and let those things continue to happen, to call them out in a loving way and say, hey, this is how I am feeling. This is how I'm experiencing this, to share this, because there's congregations, there's cores and congregations who are making people feel unwelcome, and regardless of the color of your skin. And we need to be making sure that we are teaching our congregations, our core members, and our fellow officers to embrace the many parts of the body. And I think, one, we need to call it out. We can't sit silent anymore either. And we need to call it out when there's something that is going wrong. And that is how we're going to further the kingdom in the name of the Salvation Army. That is how we are going to continue. I mean, the Salvation Army is is one of the organizations that is across the world and has this opportunity to be able to interact with so many people on behalf of Jesus, right? But if we are closed off and we're not an inclusive Salvation Army, that is not going to happen.
So I have another, I think you did a very good job of that. I do think we have somebody who is so appreciative of what you've shared that they want to know after this how they can contact you. So I don't know if that's something that you would be open to, but I do think that we also need to help our Caucasian officers to learn how to open up the topic of finding out how other people are experiencing the world in a way that does keep the conversation going. I'll give you an example. My husband and I requested to serve in an African American congregation here in Chicago, and I learned the most by sitting around the break table with the women that were on our staff. And there were times when they would express opinions and I would say, wait a minute, time out, I need your help. Why is that not okay? And I would ask them questions that they would respond to, and they educated me. Unfortunately, I can't pull aside every officer and say, ask questions, because some people are not sure how that would look. They're not positive. So I'm wondering if you can educate both sides of this equation. How can well-meaning non-people of color bring this topic to the foreground in a way that doesn't put everybody on the defense, but instead keeps the conversation going?
That's a great question too. And I feel like that was part of the first question that I didn't answer. So I appreciate you asking that additional question so that we can tackle that. I would say that it is important. One of the circles is to put yourself in uncomfortable situations. It doesn't have to be a comfortable conversation. How do you have uncomfortable conversations? Make sure that you're having uncomfortable conversations. Make sure you're engaging yourself with people that are other, that aren't Caucasian, aren't part of who you are. How are you having those conversations, and are they genuine? Because if you're only trying to get something from somebody, but you're also not trying to give, then people are not going to give. I think I posted it in the thing. It was like, if you have a Black friend who has not shared their experiences with racism with you, then you don't have a Black friend. You don't really know that person, because that is part of who we are. So that is part of my experience, and part of makes it up it's part of my experience. It's part of who I am. It's part of how I present myself to the world, is those experiences that I've had. The same thing with you, as people that are of Anglo descent, right? The same thing with you. You have experiences that are valuable for everyone to learn from, but just don't come in thinking that I'm going to take. But what do you also have to give? That give could be a listening ear. Like, I don't want you to have these experiences. How can I hear? I think conferences or summits like this, I was talking to Lieutenant Natalie last night, and I was like, man, I wish this was at least a one-star event. So everybody in the territory that would at least have one person from their corps that attended it, right? I didn't know there were such things growing up as a kid. I now know as an adult there's certain events where you have to go to as an officer, right? I think that opportunities to make people become uncomfortable, and teaching them how to have those uncomfortable conversations, and teaching them that it is okay to be uncomfortable, and teaching them how to listen. I think one of the things that I know that happens at the training college, which I don't know has happened always, is, they take a course on how to be culturally literate, right? So how do you go out and how do we dive deeper into that course to make sure they actually get to have some of those experiences, so then they can come back and have conversations with each other about it before they go out and have to have grace extended to them because a mistake was made that could have been prevented.
Absolutely. So I want to say that Angie is on the Racial Justice Facebook group. That's SA Racial Justice. That's open to all delegates. So that is one forum that you would be able to communicate with Angie through. And
another one is, I'm sorry.
I think that we'll continue to keep this open for any questions that you may have. I wonder if you could speak any more, and maybe you can feel free to tell me that you feel like you've covered this, but what is the next step to identify implicit bias and how these biases become explicit? That was the first part of a question.
Yep. Another thing is I'm open to receiving emails. I am at the Waterloo Cedar Falls Corps here in the Central Territory. My email address is an interesting one. It is 13, so 13 is my favorite number. I always think there were 12 disciples in Jesus, so 13 is the perfect number, right? So 13, A-N-T, which is the first three letters of Anthony, I-N-A, the last three letters of Gina, which are my siblings. So 13antina@gmail.com. So that is my email. And I really think the next steps are definitely to, and I guess I don't, the next steps are to really look inside yourself. You know, the circles that we talked about, you know, shining that flashlight, understanding that we all have biases, to be very introspective and looking inside yourself, using the pause model, having that person that will give you feedback that is great, researching and getting to know more information about implicit bias, taking some of the Harvard Implicit Bias Project opportunities to expose some of those implicit biases that you might have. Really think about some experiences that you have had and challenge yourself as to what those experiences might be. You know, if you have a burning desire about a particular topic, why? If something makes your blood boil, something as simple as Black Lives Matters makes your blood boil, why? Explore as to why. If something if you see something else that somebody is bothering somebody else and you don't have a reaction, why? I think the next steps are you really have to be intentional in being introspective and getting to know yourself really, really well so you can interact with people in a different way. How do you respond to people when they tell you that something has happened to them and you're like, that doesn't make sense? Why do you have that reaction? I think the next steps have to come from you inside. I can't tell you individually. I've given you some of the tools that I have used in order to be more introspective, but I can't tell you personally how that will work for each of you. But you have to want to do the work. I think the next steps is you have to want to do the work. And you can't sit on the fact, well, it's unconscious, so therefore there's nothing I can do about it. That's not true. You can think about how you react to things and where does that reaction come from.
I think another thing that I'd just like to point out is that Dr. Cleveland's sessions where she spoke about psychological homelessness really also fits in with a lot of this, so that there are other teachings from this summit that would tie in beautifully and dovetail with what you have been saying. And I hope that those of us that have chosen certain breakout sessions will go back and listen to all of them, because I think we all are in a real learning mode and want want this to not just be one good seminar, so to speak, but to have this be a real crossroads for our territory.
Yep.
I'm thankful that you are in this territory, Angie. I hope you don't mind me calling you by your nickname, but I'm very, very thankful that you are in this territory and that you have prepared yourself so skillfully to be this moderator and to share what you have. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. I absolutely think that it is an honor to be a part of a part of a conversation. I really wish it could have been in person so that we could have deeper conversations, that we can explore this. I hope that people take the information. I don't know if the slides will be shared, but they absolutely, if you email me, I can share the slides with you, so that you have some of the documentation. I normally have a handout, but we're not in person, so I can't hand it out. But yes, I'm happy to be a resource moving forward. I'm happy to further God's kingdom in any way that I can.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I think this concludes this breakout session. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for our concluding session. I think you won't want to miss it.